The following program was produced as part of The Challenge of Diversity, a campaign to increase multicultural understanding in San Diego.
We hear so much about America, you know, being America so beautiful, and that you could, all you have to do is to pick up that money right over there, you know. They're just, either they grow on trees or they lie on the street. See, that's the reason I came over.
Just to hear America is some kind of, you know, it tickles us, you know, that we also think of coming over here when we graduate.
I dream about reaching the United States, and this is the only way I can join the Navy and see the United States.
I came here to do more work in dance because at the time I had several professors who have been in the United States, and I was very much interested in doing work in what we call modern dance or contemporary dance. And so the only place where I could get advanced training, knowledge of modern dance, was in the United States.
Filipinos in America. We are the largest Asian American population in the nation today. Mabuhay, I'm Ray Gatchalian. Up until the early 1980s, when political events in the Philippines precipitated our involvement in international politics, Filipinos were probably America's most overlooked minority. Yet, Filipinos have played key roles in U.S. history. In fact, Filipinos had founded settlements in what is now Louisiana before the American Revolution.
The first Filipinos to come to the Americas were 16th century Manila men. Pressed into service under the Spanish, they sailed the Pacific in galleons built by their countrymen's forced labor. No strangers to the open sea, these Filipinos quickly earned an international reputation as excellent sailors. While these early Filipinos were respected seamen, many Manila men would not stand for the harsh, torturous treatment at the hands of their Spanish masters. After long months of forced labor on the high seas with little or no pay, they jumped ship at the first opportunity, becoming in the process Filipino pioneers. The Manila men first settled in Acapulco, Mexico in the 16th century. As early as 1765, however, Filipinos were slipping into the bayous and swamps of Louisiana to escape the cruelties of the Spanish. Thus, Filipinos became the first Asian immigrants to what would become the continental United States. For over 250 years, Spanish-speaking Filipino Cajuns have proudly contributed to the economy and culture of New Orleans and Louisiana.
As a kid, I used to sell vegetables here from my grandfather's farm. Like thousands of other early immigrants, he worked the land. Just how did Filipinos become so tightly linked with agriculture in the American economy? The story begins with the first immigrants who arrived in Hawaii at the beginning of the 20th century. Labor troubles and public sentiment against Chinese and Japanese immigrant aliens had forced Hawaiian plantation owners to look elsewhere for willing, cheap, capable labor. Elsewhere was the Philippines. As a result of the Spanish-American and Filipino-American wars, the Philippines became a territorial protectorate or colony of the United States. Filipinos now found themselves classified as non-alien but still non-citizen American nationals. This new status opened the door for the first Filipino exodus to the United States and its waiting farms and canneries.
The first Filipino immigrants to Hawaii were indentured workers or cicadas. Idealistic and highly motivated, this largely male group of rural Filipinos fully intended to work out their 3-year contracts in the sugarcane and pineapple fields and return to their families and homeland wealthy and prosperous. Between 1906 and 1919, nearly 30,000 Filipinos sought the dream of a better life in Hawaii. Considered the lowest rank in a work and social system dominated by whites, the cicadas found themselves held down as unskilled laborers for much of their lives. Unfortunately, this pattern would continue to be repeated for Filipinos throughout the agricultural industries of America's West Coast. Not all Filipino laborers succumbed to Hawaiian fever. Between 1920 and 1934, thousands journeyed to the West Coast ports of Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle. These hard-working Filipino Americans, made up of people from several different Filipino subcultures, called themselves Pinoys. as a means of recognizing their need for each other and for community. To the job-seeking Pinoy, Alaska meant quick money. Cannery work drew thousands of Alaskeros north for the spring and summer fishing season. Though the pay, $30 to $45 a month, was higher than that offered in the fields of California, the work was far from easy. In 1930, there were more than 4,200 Alaskeros working in the fish houses. California, the Golden State feeds our nation. Cold and wet in January, February, and March. Hot and dry from April till October. In the summer, the temperatures can soar close to 120 degrees in these fields. The days are long and the work's hard. And for too long, the wages for Pinoys were always below minimum.
And then they pay us 25 cents an hour. So that's what my first job over there.
In the 1930s, 31, 32, that was Depression time. Well, then we were paid 10 cents an hour, or $1 a day.
Pinoys and Alaskeros fought for safer working conditions and fair wages. They organized and they stood together. They fought not only the canneries and farm industries, but racist white unionists who did not want Filipinos in the rank and file. But Filipinos would not give up. From Hawaiian and Alaskan locals of the International Longshoremen's and Warehousemen's Union to the Filipino-Chicano Coalition that created the modern-day United Farm Workers of America, Filipinos were instrumental in the growth of American unions.
I know by experience that employers don't raise the wages even if you ask. If you asked as an individual, they fire you, you know. But when you are in the union, somebody going to speak for you and somebody who knows what he's talking about, you know. So you bargain collectively. Instead of individually, you bargain collectively. That's the power of the union. The reason why people come together is because for mutual benefits and mutual protection. That's the only way.
The Pinoys who ventured to the U.S. mainland came with a dream. They called themselves schoolboys or fountain pen boys. They wanted an education. They wanted to better themselves in this golden land named America.
I never expected that I would be in this kind of situation. And I was willing to work for my way through, like what they said. But then when I came in, you know, now it was a different story. Because while the teachers were saying those things, the opportunities for an education, they did not tell about the racial discrimination here, see? And Filipinos in the Philippines don't know very much about racial discrimination.
Young Filipinos had been led to believe that their journeys to the fabled America would reap them great rewards. Most left their families, believing they would return after a few years. Thus, for every one Filipina who ventured to America's golden shores, there were almost 20 of her countrymen arriving with her.
There was no Filipina. See, there were 2 old Filipina women here that I know. And those were the only Filipinas that I know.
How could you support a wife when you are working about 35 to an hour? Can't do it. Even yourself, you'll be struggling. So that's kind of impossible.
Suffering from culture shock and unable to speak the language fluently, Pinoys were originally perceived as a docile, easily exploited workforce. Other than farm and cannery work, the jobs open to Pinoys were minimal. They became domestics in hotels, dishwashers in restaurants, mess boys, and ship stewards. Cut off from their own culture and needful of human belonging, they formed bachelor societies. Later generations of immigrants would affectionately refer to these early pioneers as manong, or elder brother. These men who had come from different Filipino subcultures and spoke different languages banded together for their common good. Sometimes 10 or 15 manongs would rent an apartment together in an effort to lower expenses.
Ramona, I heard the mission bell apart. Caress you, I caress you, in all my heart.
Music blossomed wherever Filipinos went. From bunkhouse jam sessions to dance hall orchestras, Pinoy musicians blended classical, jazz, swing, and contemporary sounds into their own distinctive arrangements.
Ramona, we'll meet beside the waterfall. I dread that
Filipinos is one of the best in the world for a musician. They had debate with the Italian in San Francisco before, no? Yeah, I don't know, Fort Louis, Washington. And who was the best that they could play the music? Filipino beat the Italian.
Preying on the needs of the young Pinoy, unscrupulous whites, Chinese, and Filipinos set up gambling parlors and taxi dancing halls. At the dance halls, men lined up to buy tickets for their brief contacts with women. 10 cents a dance.
My experiences in the taxi dancer, that makes really the boys happy. We go there, we work hard, and we feel tense in the dance, maybe half an hour. And after that, maybe we have a date with them, go down Shapsui House, and go someplace else, and enjoy just like any really white American.
Some Filipino men found companionship, love, and marriage with women of other races. The reactions to this from white society were swift and ugly. In the 1930s, anti-miscegenation laws that had earlier prevented blacks, Japanese, and Chinese from marrying whites were amended to include Filipinos.
I was married to a white woman for 34 years. And we lived for 11 years without marriage because we were excluded on the law. They used to stop me. And the police would say, "Don't you know the law?" And I said, "I know the law, but it's not a crime to have a friend. We are not married."
The Great Depression made work scarce. Dispossessed white laborers resented Pinoys. They reasoned that the Filipinos were stealing American jobs. Racist attitudes began to surface more frequently.
It's just like the illegals when they come here and take the American jobs. And we came to America and we took their jobs. And they got mad at us. That's my opinion.
Pinoys were denied access to an increasing number of mainstream American businesses. Positively no Filipinos allowed read the signs. In the late 20s and early 30s, racism took the form of rioting mobs. From Washington to California, anti-Filipino race riots took on increasingly ugly overtones. The most infamous race riot happened here in Watsonville, California, in January of 1930. At the time, a few cases of reckless driving by Pinoys were being heard by the local justice of the peace, a Judge D.W. Rohrback.
Judge Rohrback. Well, sure. That guy, made some statement in the news that, you see, I don't know why he hated Filipinos at that time, but maybe perhaps because on account of their thing, they are so dressed up nicely all the time. They ride nice-looking cars, and maybe perhaps that's why he said something like, the Filipinos are they are dressed like peacocks and ride like Solomon in all his glory. See, that's how he quoted in the paper, see?
Shortly after that, the North Monterey County Chamber of Commerce passed a set of inflammatory resolutions written by the same Judge Rohrback.
Being but 10 years removed from a bolo and breech clout, the Filipino population of this district are designated with being undesirable and possessing unhealthy habits and destructive of the wage scale of other nationalities in agricultural and industrial pursuits. We do not advocate violence, but we do feel that the United States should give the Filipinos their liberty and send those unwelcome inhabitants from our shores, that the white people who have inherited this country for themselves and their offspring might live.
This inflammatory rhetoric
was reported in all the Watsonville newspapers and promptly responded to in a Filipino pamphlet called The Torch.
At a Filipino community meeting a few days later, 300 Pinoys came here to speak their minds and listen to their leaders.
But young white rowdies were not interested in listening or speaking. Several carloads came to crash the community meeting, only to be sent home by deputies.
Later that night, fights broke out on the streets of Watsonville between whites and Pinoys. Fueled by wild rumors and hate, roving bands of whites continued hunting and savagely beating Filipinos for 4 days. As many as 700 white men and boys wrecked and looted Pinoy homes and bunkhouses.
And they told us not to cross Bridge Street, you know. There was a street over there, you know, in town before. They call it Bridge Street. That you are not supposed to cross that tonight because people are going to kill you, see. They had warned us a lot of times. So we took their advices. We didn't go. And that's why maybe perhaps we were not involved.
Somebody was asleep in a camp. And they shut the camp. And the one on the bed, on the cot bed, was shot and got dead.
What these people were doing, young drivers were doing was hitting every place in the house, you see. And the bullet ricocheted and got him instead, see.
Neither Tobera's death nor the Watsonville riots escaped international attention. Newspapers across the U.S. reported the murder. And in the Philippines, a National Humiliation Day marked the infamous event and renewed demands for Philippine independence from U.S. dominion. Philippine leaders negotiating for their country's freedom found a strange alliance with American conservatives who hoped both to exclude new immigrants and severely restrict Filipinos living and working in the States.
In 1934, Congress passed the Tydings-McDuffie Act, giving the Philippines its freedom and stripping Filipino Americans of their favored national status. Overnight, they became aliens. Immigration was limited to 50 Filipinos a year. Filipinos were legally barred from marrying whites, lost significant numbers of jobs in the merchant marine, and were not allowed to buy land. But then, on December 7th, 1941, everything changed. The very day that the Japanese shocked America into World War II, they also launched a massive campaign into the Philippines, landing first at Luzon. Less than a month after the initial invasion, Manila was under Japanese control. Mainstream American attitudes quickly changed towards Filipinos during those early war days. The heroics of the Philippine soldiers who stood shoulder to shoulder with the Americans at Bataan and Corregidor did not go unnoticed.
Filipinos and Americans are fighting side by side against the brutal imperialistic forces of the Emperor God Hirohito. The bravery and heroism of the loyal, democracy-loving native Filipinos is legend among our boys as they fight together for the liberation of the Philippines.
Filipino Americans were initially barred from volunteering for military duty. The fall of Manila prompted the Selective Service to reclassify Filipinos as nationals and therefore subject to the draft. Filipino Americans flocked to the armed services, so strong was their concern for both America and the Philippines. The Army quickly responded, creating the 1st and 2nd Filipino Infantry Regiments. Altogether, more than 7,000 served in the two regiments. At home, Pinoys joined the Merchant Marine, worked in war plants and shipyards, and invested heavily in war bonds. World War II had a lasting impact on Filipinos in America. Laws that had excluded Filipinos from mainstream American life were rescinded. Filipino Americans were able to become full citizens, no longer unwanted aliens or landless nationals. Relaxed immigration rules after the war allowed many Pinoys to finally bring loved ones back to the U.S. Now war brides, classified as GI dependents, found a new life waiting for them in the States. Filipino veterans of the U.S. Armed Forces in the Philippines were also offered citizenship. Many came to America with their families in tow. After the war and during the 50s, roughly 50,000 Filipinos immigrated to the U.S. These family-oriented immigrants, together with returning members of the 1st and 2nd Infantries, many with new brides,
laid the foundation for Filipino-American society as we know it today.
Yeah, it's just like in a pack. Yeah, that's why I like it so much. It tastes so good.
What time do you start? 6:30. Get the beer work at 6:30. Okay, have a look, yeah.
Okay.
Which one's?
What's it? It's hot.
This
No,
one?
this one is okay.
This one?
Uh-huh. Thank you. How is it? Hot?
Good. Good.
I heard about the Navy at that time. I was going to school in Manila, and it's a good adventure. My job at first when I was recruited was a steward. At that time, from 1952 until 1956, everyone that was recruited to the United States Navy was a steward. And we didn't have any choice. I experienced that if you belong to a minority, there is always that, yeah, you cannot always say that you are equal to them.
There's always discrimination.
It's in their mind. You are down. I satisfied myself being a minority. I just dance with the music. If whatever the music is, you have to dance with it, just to get along.
I appreciated all the things that he provided for us as children, because our relatives don't have half or even a fraction of the things we had, and we all took it for granted.
Because, when you're young, you don't really appreciate that kind of thing. When you get older, it's like, how did you get through that? In return, the value of that, I want to do better for my children, and I'm sure we all feel the same, to continue improving our life, whether it's here in the United States or if we're in the Philippines.
The American-born and raised children of the pre- and post-war years represent the first true Filipino-Americans. They tried to make sense of the overt racism they experienced in the non-Filipino mainstream.
Some of the outfits we wore, I wore Barong Tagalog or something similar to that, to school once, and a girl said, turned to me, she says, "What is that?" Because it was so out of the ordinary, and I think after that I didn't ever wear it again. Because there are certain clothes they would give me, it's like, wear this to school, and I'm going, I don't think so, because no one else wears it, and that peer pressure is so strong.
1965 signaled a rapid shift in the makeup of the Filipino-American culture. Immigration laws were relaxed significantly. The allowable number of Filipino immigrants jumped to 20,000 annually.
Between 1960 and 1970, the population of Filipino-Americans nearly doubled. These new immigrants differed considerably from earlier groups. Well-educated, middle-class professionals, these women and men arrived better prepared for higher levels of employment. Although not without struggle, their assimilation has been swift and successful.
The job opportunities here are much better than back home, because back home, sometimes if you are professional, it's hard to get a job. It's easy if you are a nurse to come here. And I said, well, when we were young, we are still, we want challenge, we like to advance our knowledge of the techniques, the skills that we don't have in the Philippines. I came here, because of, especially for the children, I have more opportunities here. And now my son is graduating from high school, and he will be going to college next year at UC Santa Cruz. As we say, there is no place like home, but this is my second home.
We wanted to expose the young Filipino Americans in San Diego to the culture of their parents. I guess this is a form of expression for me, as I love to see something happening on stage. I like to see the Philippine dance developed as a creative art form. I think it will take a lot of years before we're completely integrated into the society here. And having a dance company that performs regularly presents a very, very good image of the Filipinos in the community, and I think that is one of the contributions that I hope I can give to the Filipino community. I was in the Philippines in December, and there in the whole city of Manila, there was only one small children's dance troupe. All our arts are dying because the influence of the United States is so strong. Rock and roll has completely taken over. You can't find any records of Philippine dance, Philippine folk dance, anywhere in the Philippines anymore. The only collection of Philippine records is in my house. For those Filipino Americans who've been born here and have never been to the Philippines, it really provides them a very, very rare opportunity to be involved in the performing art. They could not get this kind of experience anywhere in the community, nor can they get it in the Philippines if they went back there. In other words, if you really want to learn good Philippine dance, you come right here in San Diego.
In 1947, the renowned Filipino-American writer Carlos Bulosan wrote, "It did not make me conceited that out of the slums and kitchens of California, out of the fear and hatred, the terror and hunger, the utter loneliness and death, I came out alive spiritually and intellectually. Instead, it has made me humble and serious with my relations with my fellow men." The determination and courage of Filipino Americans like Bulosan, whether they were Cajuns, Cicadas, Manong,